1. The invisible rules that quietly shape your life. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that someone has been quietly influencing nearly every important decision you've ever made. The friends you chose, the career you pursued, the person you fell in love with, even the fears that kept you awake at night. It sounds like the beginning of a mystery novel or perhaps the plot of a psychological thriller. But what if that hidden influence wasn't another person at all? What if it was your own mind, working beneath the surface, following rules you never consciously agreed to? Take a moment to reflect on that thought. Most of us like to believe we are fully in control of our lives. We imagine ourselves as the authors of our own stories, carefully weighing options before making rational decisions. We picture our minds as clear windows through which we see the world exactly as it is. Yet psychology paints a very different picture. It suggests that much of what we think, feel, and do is shaped by invisible mental patterns that quietly operate in the background, outside our awareness. These hidden patterns are not signs that something is wrong with us. In fact, they are perfectly normal. They are the result of millions of years of evolution, countless personal experiences, and the remarkable shortcuts our brains have developed simply to help us survive. Without these shortcuts, even the smallest decision would become exhausting. Imagine having to carefully analyze every step before walking, every word before speaking, or every face before deciding whether it looked friendly. Life would slow to a crawl. So the mind creates invisible rules. It simplifies, it predicts, it fills in missing information. It relies on habits, assumptions, emotions, and memories to help us move through an incredibly complicated world. Most of the time, these rules serve us well. But sometimes, they quietly lead us in directions we never intended to go. Think about how often people say, "I don't know why I did that." Perhaps someone stays in an unhealthy relationship long after they know they should leave. Another person spends years chasing a career that brings them no happiness. Someone else constantly worries about what other people think, even when those opinions have little real importance. On the surface, these choices may seem irrational. Yet underneath them are powerful psychological forces, patiently guiding behavior like unseen currents beneath the surface of the ocean. The fascinating part is that we rarely notice these currents while we're caught inside them. Imagine standing in a river. If the water moves slowly enough, you might never realize it's carrying you downstream. Everything feels normal because the movement is gradual. Only when you step onto solid ground and look back do you recognize how far you've drifted. Our minds work in much the same way. Many of the beliefs we hold about ourselves were formed years ago, often during childhood, without our conscious permission. A casual comment from a teacher, a compliment from a parent, an embarrassing moment at school, a painful rejection. These experiences can quietly become invisible rules about who we believe we are. I have to be perfect. People always leave. I'm not creative. I need everyone to like me. Over time, these ideas stop feeling like opinions. They begin to feel like facts. And because the brain prefers consistency, it starts searching for evidence that confirms those beliefs while quietly ignoring evidence that contradicts them. Without realizing it, we become both the storyteller and the audience of narratives that may no longer be true. Take another slow moment to consider this. How many of your current beliefs about yourself were carefully chosen, and how many simply arrived without invitation? Perhaps one of the greatest surprises psychology offers is that our minds are not designed primarily to make us happy. They are designed to keep us alive. For most of human history, survival depended on noticing danger more quickly than beauty, remembering painful experiences more vividly than pleasant ones, and staying close to the safety of the group rather than standing apart. Those ancient priorities are still woven into the architecture of the modern brain. This means that many of our everyday thoughts are echoes of challenges our distant ancestors faced thousands of years ago. The anxiety before speaking in front of a crowd may have little to do with the audience itself, and much more to do with an ancient fear of social rejection. The tendency to dwell on criticism longer than compliments reflects a brain that evolved to pay closer attention to threats than rewards. Even our resistance to change often comes from mental systems that learned long ago that the familiar, even if imperfect, was usually safer than the unknown. When viewed through this lens, human behavior begins to feel less confusing. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" we begin asking a gentler question. What invisible rule might my mind be following? That small shift in perspective changes everything. Rather than seeing ourselves as flawed or inconsistent, we begin to recognize patterns. Patterns can be understood, and once they are understood, they can slowly begin to change. This journey isn't about judging yourself for the ways your mind works. It's about becoming curious. Curiosity is remarkably powerful because it replaces criticism with observation. Instead of fighting every thought that appears, we simply notice it. We ask where it came from. We wonder what purpose it once served. Often, we discover that even our most frustrating habits began as attempts to protect us. Over the next several chapters, we'll gently uncover some of these hidden psychological truths. Some may feel surprisingly familiar. Others may challenge ideas you've believed for years. You may even recognize parts of yourself in stories that seem to describe someone else entirely. There is no need to rush through these ideas. Let them settle quietly, like leaves drifting onto the surface of a still lake. Sometimes understanding arrives not in dramatic moments of revelation, but in quiet realizations that unfold long after the conversation has ended. As you continue listening, remember that the goal is not to become someone different overnight. The goal is simply to see a little more clearly than you did before. Because once you notice the invisible rules shaping your life, they begin to lose some of their power. And perhaps the most surprising place to begin is with a simple question that has fascinated psychologists, philosophers, and storytellers for generations. Who are you, really? The answer may not be as fixed as it seems. 2. You are mostly a story your brain keeps updating. If someone asked you to describe who you are, you would probably answer without much hesitation. You might mention your name, your profession, your personality, your values, or perhaps a few important experiences that shaped your life. You might say you're kind but cautious, ambitious but introverted, or someone who has always loved learning. It would feel like a straightforward question, one with a clear and stable answer. But what if that answer changes more often than you realize? What if the person you believe yourself to be is not a fixed reality, but an ongoing story that your mind quietly edits every single day? Take a moment to reflect on that idea. It is comforting to think of ourselves as consistent. We like believing there is a solid core inside us that has remained unchanged throughout the years. After all, we remember being a child, a teenager, and an adult. We carry memories from each chapter of our lives, and because those memories seem connected, we assume the person experiencing them has remained exactly the same. Yet psychology suggests something much more fascinating. Your identity is less like a photograph frozen in time and more like a novel that is constantly being revised. Each new experience adds another page. Old chapters are rewritten without you noticing. Entire scenes become brighter, darker, or disappear altogether, not because you're trying to deceive yourself, but because your brain is always trying to create a story that makes sense of who you are today. Imagine opening an old family photo album. You pause at a picture from years ago. Maybe it's your first day of school, a birthday celebration, or a holiday with relatives. As you look at the image, memories begin to surface. You remember how the room looked, what people were wearing, perhaps even how you felt. But here's the remarkable part. The memory you experience is not a perfect recording stored somewhere inside your brain. It's a reconstruction. Each time you remember the event, your brain pieces it together from fragments. It fills in missing details. It smooths rough edges. Sometimes it even borrows information from later experiences without your awareness. The memory feels vivid and real, but it is not identical to the original moment. In a sense, every act of remembering is also an act of rewriting. Researchers have found that memory works less like a video camera and more like an artist painting the same landscape again and again. The mountains remain, the river stays in roughly the same place, but the colors change, the lighting shifts, and new details quietly appear while others fade away. This explains why siblings often remember the same childhood event very differently. One recalls a joyful family vacation filled with laughter, while another remembers tension and arguments. Neither memory is necessarily false. Each person's brain reconstructed the experience through the lens of their own emotions, personality, and later life experiences. The same process shapes the story you tell yourself about who you are. Perhaps you've always believed you're shy because you struggled to speak in class as a child. Over time, your brain begins collecting every moment that supports this identity: the awkward conversation at a party, the hesitation before introducing yourself to someone new, the times you preferred staying home instead of going out. Meanwhile, countless moments that contradict the story are quietly overlooked. The presentation you gave successfully, the stranger you easily chatted with while waiting in line, the friends who describe you as warm and engaging. Your mind isn't lying. It's simply editing. Like an author determined to keep the plot consistent, your brain naturally favors information that fits the narrative you've already built. This is one reason people often feel trapped by identities they created years earlier. Someone who struggled with mathematics in school may carry the belief, "I'm just not intelligent enough," long into adulthood, even after solving complex problems at work. Another person who experienced heartbreak in their first relationship may unconsciously adopt the story that love always ends in disappointment, interpreting every future relationship through that same lens. These stories become so familiar that they stop feeling like stories. They become reality. Take another slow moment to think about this. If someone had described you 10 years ago, would they have used the same words you would choose today? Probably not. Perhaps you have become calmer, more patient, or more confident. Maybe life has made you softer in some ways and stronger in others. The beliefs you once defended passionately may no longer seem important. Dreams that once consumed your attention might have quietly faded, replaced by entirely new ambitions. Despite all these changes, your mind creates the comforting illusion that you've been essentially the same person all along. Psychologists sometimes call this the illusion of continuity. It allows us to feel stable in an ever-changing world, even though nearly every part of our lives is constantly evolving. Your body changes. Your relationships change. Your priorities change. Even your memories change. Why wouldn't your identity change as well? In many ways, this realization is deeply freeing. If your identity is a story rather than a prison, then it can continue to evolve. The labels you've carried for years are not permanent sentences. They are descriptions written by a version of you who had limited information at the time. The person who once believed they were incapable of leadership may one day guide an entire team. The individual who considered themselves uncreative may discover a love for painting, writing, or music later in life. Someone convinced they would always be anxious may gradually become the calm presence others rely on. None of these transformations require becoming someone entirely new. They simply require allowing the story to continue. Of course, this doesn't mean we can invent any identity we wish overnight. Stories must still be grounded in experience. Growth is gradual. Each small decision becomes another sentence, another paragraph, another chapter. Choosing to speak up once does not instantly make someone fearless, but it may become the first page of a different narrative. Over time, enough pages create an entirely different book. There is another quiet lesson hidden within this idea. If everyone else is also living inside their own evolving story, then perhaps we should be slower to judge them. The difficult coworker, the distant neighbor, the impatient stranger in traffic, each of them is carrying a narrative shaped by memories, fears, hopes, and experiences we cannot see. Just as your identity is more complex than any single moment, so is theirs. This perspective invites compassion without demanding perfection. It reminds us that human beings are never finished products. We are all unfinished manuscripts, constantly revised by experience, loss, love, failure, and time itself. So tonight, before you drift further into thought, ask yourself one quiet question. Which parts of the story I tell about myself are undeniably true, and which parts have simply been repeated so often that they now feel unquestionable? There is no need to answer immediately. Simply let the question rest in your mind. Because as we'll soon discover, the brain doesn't just rewrite our personal stories. It also has a remarkable tendency to defend those stories, even when they no longer match reality. And that is where our next psychological truth begins. 3. Your mind protects beliefs more than truth. Imagine holding a map that has guided you through life for many years. It has helped you make decisions, avoid danger, and understand the world around you. One day, someone gently points out that parts of the map are wrong. A few roads don't exist. Entire landmarks have been misplaced. There are shortcuts you never noticed, and dead ends you've mistaken for safe paths. How would you react? You might think the obvious response would be gratitude. After all, a more accurate map would make future journeys easier. But human psychology often responds differently. Before curiosity has a chance to speak, something deeper awakens, a quiet instinct to defend the map we already know. Take a moment to reflect on that. One of the most surprising truths about the human mind is that it is not always searching for what is true. More often, it is searching for what feels consistent. Once we adopt a belief about ourselves, other people, or the world, our brain begins working quietly to protect it. Not because the belief is necessarily correct, but because changing it requires effort, uncertainty, and sometimes even emotional pain. This tendency is so natural that we rarely notice it happening. Imagine buying a new car. Before making the purchase, you probably noticed dozens of different vehicles on the road. But after choosing your own model, something strange happens. Suddenly, that same car seems to appear everywhere. Every drive feels filled with people who made the exact same choice. The cars were always there. Your attention simply changed. The brain is constantly filtering enormous amounts of information. Every second, your senses receive far more data than you could ever consciously process. To avoid becoming overwhelmed, the mind decides what deserves your attention. It highlights certain details while quietly allowing countless others to fade into the background. The same process happens with beliefs. Suppose someone believes that people are generally kind. They naturally notice acts of generosity, friendly conversations, and moments of compassion. Another person believes the world is selfish and cruel. They pay closer attention to dishonesty, conflict, and betrayal. Both people are observing the same world. Yet each experiences a remarkably different reality. This psychological tendency is known as confirmation bias. It is the mind's habit of searching for, remembering, and giving greater importance to information that supports what we already believe, while overlooking evidence that challenges those beliefs. It sounds like a flaw, but from the brain's perspective, it is actually a shortcut. Imagine if every opinion you held had to be completely re-examined every single day. Deciding what to eat, who to trust, or which route to take would become exhausting. Stable beliefs allow us to navigate life efficiently. They reduce uncertainty and create a sense of order. The difficulty begins when those beliefs become outdated. Consider someone who failed an important exam as a teenager. In that painful moment, they quietly formed a belief. I'm not intelligent. Years pass. They succeed at work, solve difficult problems, and receive compliments from colleagues. Yet somehow, every small mistake still feels like proof that the original belief was correct. Every success is dismissed as luck, while every failure is treated as undeniable evidence. The belief survives because the mind selectively gathers information that keeps the story alive. In this way, people often become prisoners of conclusions they reached long ago. The same pattern appears in relationships. Someone who was deeply betrayed may begin believing that trust always leads to disappointment. As they meet new people, their attention naturally focuses on signs of dishonesty or rejection. Small misunderstandings suddenly feel significant. Innocent mistakes seem suspicious. Meanwhile, genuine acts of loyalty receive far less emotional weight. The belief quietly creates the evidence that appears to confirm itself. Take another slow moment to consider this. How many opinions do you hold because they are objectively true, and how many simply feel familiar? Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this process is that it affects everyone, regardless of intelligence. We often assume that smarter people are naturally more objective. In reality, intelligence sometimes makes confirmation bias even stronger. A clever mind can construct remarkably convincing arguments for almost any conclusion. Rather than questioning a belief, it becomes highly skilled at defending it. History offers countless examples of brilliant individuals who remained convinced of ideas that were eventually proven wrong. Entire societies have confidently accepted beliefs that later generations found difficult to imagine. Scientific understanding itself progresses because researchers occasionally become willing to abandon long-held assumptions in favor of better evidence. This willingness is surprisingly rare. There is another psychological force closely connected to confirmation bias, one that explains why changing our minds can feel so uncomfortable. It is called cognitive dissonance. Imagine believing yourself to be an honest person, only to realize you've told a serious lie. Suddenly, two conflicting ideas exist in your mind at the same time. I am honest. I just behaved dishonestly. The tension between these beliefs creates emotional discomfort. Rather than sitting with that discomfort, the brain quickly looks for ways to reduce it. Perhaps the lie wasn't really important. Perhaps everyone lies sometimes. Perhaps someone else forced the situation. Instead of changing the deeper belief about ourselves, we often adjust the story surrounding the event. This happens far more often than we realize. When people spend years pursuing a career they secretly dislike, admitting the truth can feel unbearable. Accepting that they chose the wrong path may require questioning years of sacrifice. It often feels easier to convince themselves they are happy than to confront the possibility that they are not. The same pattern appears in relationships, personal habits, financial decisions, and even everyday conversations. Our minds naturally seek harmony. Unfortunately, harmony and truth are not always the same thing. Yet there is something quietly hopeful about understanding this. Once you recognize that your brain is designed to protect beliefs, you become slightly less controlled by them. Instead of immediately defending every opinion, you can grow curious about it. Rather than asking, "How can I prove I'm right?" you begin asking, "What evidence might I be missing?" That simple question has transformed scientific discoveries, repaired friendships, and changed countless individual lives. It requires humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is simply recognizing that your current understanding, however convincing it feels, may still be incomplete. The wisest people are rarely those who never change their minds. They are often the ones most willing to do so. As evening settles around you, let one final thought drift gently through your mind. Perhaps certainty is comforting, but curiosity is liberating. The moment we stop treating our beliefs as permanent possessions, they become tools rather than cages. We gain the freedom to learn, to grow, and to see the world with fresh eyes instead of familiar assumptions. And yet, even when we become willing to question our beliefs, another powerful force quietly shapes what we think and how we behave. Because many of the opinions we defend most passionately are not simply about being right. They are about something even older, even deeper, and profoundly human. They are about belonging. For people fear rejection more than being wrong. Imagine for a moment that you are standing around a campfire thousands of years ago. The sun has disappeared beyond the horizon, and the wilderness stretches endlessly into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the flickering light are predators, harsh weather, and countless unknown dangers. Around the fire sits your tribe, the small group of people who share food, offer protection, and help one another survive. Now imagine being asked to leave. There are no houses to return to, no supermarkets, no hospitals, no police, no phone to call for help. To be separated from the group would not simply be lonely, it could mean the difference between life and death. Take a moment to reflect on that image. Although our modern world has changed beyond recognition, the human brain still carries echoes of that ancient reality. Deep within us lives a psychological system that treats social acceptance as something essential for survival. Even when we know logically that being disliked by a coworker or receiving criticism online poses no physical danger, our nervous system often reacts as though something far more serious is happening. This is why rejection hurts in ways that can seem surprisingly intense. It is also why many people would rather remain silent than risk disagreement, stay in unhappy relationships than face loneliness, or suppress their true opinions rather than stand apart from the crowd. Our minds were shaped in a world where belonging wasn't merely comforting. It was necessary. Modern psychology has repeatedly shown just how powerful this instinct is. Human beings are remarkably social creatures. We naturally observe the people around us, looking for subtle clues about how to behave, what to value, and what is considered acceptable. Most of this happens without conscious thought. We adjust our language depending on who we're speaking to. We mirror body language during conversations. We laugh more easily when others laugh, even if the joke isn't especially funny. These small adjustments help us connect with one another. They create harmony. But sometimes, the same instinct quietly persuades us to ignore our own judgment. Imagine entering a room where everyone confidently insists that the sky is green. At first, the statement seems absurd. You know the sky is blue, yet as every person around you agrees with complete certainty, something unexpected begins to happen. You hesitate, you wonder whether you've misunderstood something, you briefly question your own perception. This tendency has fascinated psychologists for generations. In famous social experiments, participants were asked to make extremely simple judgments, such as comparing the lengths of lines. The correct answer was obvious. Yet when everyone else in the room intentionally gave the wrong answer, many participants eventually agreed with the group, despite seeing the evidence with their own eyes. The remarkable part wasn't that people lacked intelligence. It was that the desire to belong quietly outweighed the desire to be correct. Think about how often this happens in everyday life. A student laughs at jokes they don't find amusing because everyone else is laughing. An employee nods during a meeting even though they have serious concerns. A friend agrees to plans they secretly don't enjoy because saying no feels uncomfortable. Someone avoids pursuing a dream because no one in their family has ever taken that path before. These moments may seem small, almost insignificant, yet over months and years they shape entire lives. One quiet compromise becomes another, then another. Eventually, a person may wake up one morning wondering how they ended up living a life that doesn't truly feel like their own. Take another slow moment to consider this. How many of your opinions were carefully chosen after deep reflection, and how many were inherited from the people around you? This isn't meant as criticism. It's simply part of being human. From the moment we're born, we learn by observing others. We absorb language, customs, beliefs, and expectations long before we're capable of questioning them. Families teach us what success looks like. Schools teach us what achievement means. Communities quietly define what is admirable, respectable, or acceptable. Much of this learning is valuable. Without it, society could hardly function. Yet every culture, every family, and every generation also passes along assumptions that deserve examination. Sometimes, we continue following invisible rules simply because everyone around us always has. Perhaps you've noticed how difficult it can be to express an unpopular opinion, even among close friends. Your heart beats a little faster, you choose your words more carefully, you watch people's reactions with unusual attention. Your body isn't overreacting. It's responding to one of humanity's oldest fears. The fear of standing alone. Interestingly, psychologists have found that social rejection activates many of the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. In other words, emotional exclusion is not merely a metaphorical wound. The brain experiences it as something deeply significant. This explains why harsh criticism from a stranger can linger in our thoughts for days, while dozens of compliments quickly fade into the background. It explains why children desperately seek approval from parents, why teenagers often fear embarrassment more than failure, and why adults continue worrying about what others think long after they tell themselves they shouldn't. The need for acceptance doesn't disappear with age. It simply changes its shape. As adults, we may no longer worry about fitting in at school, but we may seek approval from colleagues, neighbors, family members, or even complete strangers on the internet. The platforms have changed. The psychology has not. There is a quiet irony hidden within all of this. Most people are so busy worrying about being judged that they spend remarkably little time judging everyone else. Imagine walking into a room convinced that everyone is analyzing your appearance, your voice, or your every movement. In reality, many of the people around you are occupied by the exact same concern. They are wondering how they themselves are being perceived. Each person becomes the main character of their own internal story. Everyone believes the spotlight is shining on them. Yet the audience is largely looking inward. Understanding this can be strangely comforting. It reminds us that much of the pressure we feel exists not because others are constantly evaluating us, but because our own minds are constantly anticipating evaluation. This awareness does not instantly remove the fear of rejection, but it softens its grip. Instead of asking, "Will everyone approve of me?" perhaps we can begin asking a quieter question. If I never received anyone's approval, would this still matter to me? That question has the power to separate borrowed desires from genuine ones. It helps reveal which goals belong to us, and which belong to expectations we quietly inherited. Of course, choosing authenticity over approval is rarely easy. It sometimes means disappointing people, changing direction, or standing apart from the crowd. Yet history is filled with individuals who transformed the world precisely because they were willing to endure temporary rejection in pursuit of something they believed was true. Every meaningful innovation, every artistic movement, every scientific breakthrough, and every act of moral courage began with someone who accepted the possibility of standing alone. Perhaps belonging is important. Perhaps it always will be. But there is another psychological truth waiting quietly on the horizon. Even when we finally gain acceptance, achieve our goals, and receive the approval we've been chasing, something unexpected often happens. The happiness we imagined would last forever slowly begins to fade. And that is where our next journey begins. 5. Happiness quickly becomes normal. Imagine that there is a mountain you've dreamed of climbing for years. Every morning, you wake up thinking about its distant peak. You imagine the view from the top, the feeling of accomplishment, and the quiet certainty that once you finally stand there, life will somehow feel complete. So you begin the climb. The journey is long and difficult. There are moments when you wonder if you'll ever make it, But eventually, after countless steps, you reach the summit. The view is breathtaking. The air feels cleaner. Your heart races with excitement, and for a brief moment, everything is exactly as you imagined. Then something unexpected happens. Days pass. Weeks pass. The mountain slowly becomes part of the landscape behind you. The extraordinary begins to feel ordinary. Take a moment to reflect on that. This quiet transformation is one of the most fascinating psychological truths about the human mind. We spend so much of our lives believing that happiness lives just beyond the next achievement, the next purchase, the next relationship, or the next milestone. Yet again and again, after reaching what once seemed impossible, we gradually return to the emotional state we knew before. Psychologists call this phenomenon hedonic adaptation, though its meaning is surprisingly simple. Human beings have an extraordinary ability to become accustomed to change. Whether something wonderful or difficult happens, our minds slowly adjust until the new reality begins to feel normal. At first glance, this might seem disappointing. Why would our brains be designed to let joy fade? The answer may lie deep within our evolutionary past. Imagine our distant ancestors discovering a valley rich with food and fresh water. If they had become permanently satisfied, they might have stopped exploring, stopped preparing for danger, and stopped improving their chances of survival. Instead, the human brain evolved to keep looking toward the next opportunity, the next improvement, the next solution. In many ways, this constant adjustment helped our species survive. But in modern life, it often creates an endless cycle of wanting. Consider the excitement of buying a new phone. Before purchasing it, you read reviews, compare features, and imagine how much easier life will become. On the day it arrives, every detail feels exciting. The screen seems impossibly bright, the design elegant, the experience fresh. A few months later, you barely notice it. It has quietly become part of everyday life. The same pattern appears almost everywhere. Someone dreams of earning a promotion. They imagine that a higher salary and a more impressive title will finally bring lasting fulfillment. When the promotion arrives, they celebrate. Friends congratulate them. For a while, life genuinely feels different. Then routines return. Soon, the new position simply becomes their normal job, and another promotion begins to occupy their thoughts. A young couple eagerly counts the days until they move into their first home. They picture every room, every sunrise through the windows, every peaceful evening spent inside. During the first weeks, they appreciate every detail. They notice the smell of fresh paint, the quiet neighborhood, the comfort of finally having a place to call their own. Months later, they stop noticing those same details. The home hasn't changed. Their attention has. This is the quiet power of adaptation. The extraordinary slowly blends into the background, allowing the mind to focus on whatever comes next. Take another slow moment to consider your own life. Think back to something you desperately wanted 5 or 10 years ago. Perhaps it was graduating from school, finding a relationship, earning more money, moving to a different city, or achieving a personal goal that once seemed almost impossible. Now ask yourself a gentle question. How often do you consciously appreciate that achievement today? For many of us, the answer is surprisingly rare. The things that once filled us with excitement gradually become invisible because familiarity changes how we experience them. There is an old saying that fish are the last to notice the water they swim in. Perhaps human beings are similar. We become so surrounded by the blessings we once prayed for that we eventually stop seeing them altogether. This tendency doesn't only apply to possessions or accomplishments. It also shapes relationships. Imagine two people who have just fallen in love. In the beginning, every conversation feels exciting. Every message brings anticipation. They notice each other's smallest gestures and celebrate ordinary moments together. As years pass, those same moments may begin to feel routine. The comfort remains, but the novelty fades. Conversations become predictable. Shared habits replace constant discovery. This does not mean the relationship has lost its value. It means the brain has adapted. Ironically, the very stability people long for often becomes the reason they stop noticing what they have. The same is true for health. Most days we rarely wake up feeling grateful that our hearts continue beating, our lungs continue breathing, or our legs carry us from one place to another. These miracles are so constant that they disappear into the background of awareness. Only when something changes do we suddenly recognize how precious they always were. Psychology reveals a curious paradox. The mind is exceptionally good at adapting to improvements, yet it is often slow to appreciate them. This creates what many people experience as the "I'll be happy when" mindset. I'll be happy when I graduate. I'll be happy when I earn more money. I'll be happy when I find the right partner. I'll be happy when I finally have enough. Each milestone seems to promise permanent contentment. Yet after reaching it, the finish line quietly moves again. Another goal appears on the horizon. Another mountain begins calling. Of course, goals themselves are not the problem. Ambition gives life direction. Dreams inspire growth. Human progress depends on people imagining something better than what currently exists. The challenge arises when we expect achievements to permanently transform our emotional lives. No accomplishment, however meaningful, can prevent the mind from adapting. Understanding this truth can feel strangely liberating. It reminds us that happiness is less like a destination waiting at the end of a journey, and more like a way of noticing the journey itself. The moments that often bring the deepest sense of peace are surprisingly ordinary. A quiet morning before the world awakens. The sound of rain against a window. A shared laugh with someone you love. A familiar song playing softly in the background. These experiences rarely announce themselves as life-changing. Yet together, they quietly shape a meaningful life. Perhaps the secret is not trying to stop adaptation, that would be impossible, but gently interrupting it. By slowing down. By noticing. By remembering that today's ordinary moments were once tomorrow's dreams. Take one final moment to reflect before we continue. Look around your life, even if only in your imagination. What have you stopped seeing simply because it has become familiar? What blessings have quietly faded into the background, not because they lost their value, but because your remarkable mind learned to treat them as normal? Sometimes, the fastest way to feel richer is not to acquire something new. It is to notice what has been there all along. Yet even as we rediscover gratitude, another ancient feature of the human mind continues to shape our experience in a very different way. Because while happiness often fades into the background, pain has a curious habit of demanding our attention. And that is the psychological truth we will gently explore next. 6. The brain gives pain a louder voice than joy. Imagine that two things happen to you on the very same day. In the morning, a stranger smiles warmly and holds the door open as you enter a cafe. Later, a coworker compliments your work, telling you that your effort has made a real difference. As the afternoon unfolds, you enjoy a peaceful walk beneath a clear sky, answer a few messages from friends, and end the day with a satisfying meal. Then, just before you go to bed, someone makes a single critical remark. Perhaps they question your abilities, perhaps they dismiss something important to you. It isn't especially cruel, but it stings. Now ask yourself a quiet question. Which moment is most likely to replay in your mind as you lie awake that night? For many people, it isn't the smile from the stranger, the compliment, or the peaceful walk. It is the criticism. Take a moment to reflect on that. Why does one unpleasant moment often outweigh an entire day filled with good ones? Why can a single embarrassing memory from years ago suddenly return with perfect clarity, while dozens of joyful moments from the same period remain blurred or forgotten? The answer lies in one of the oldest survival systems the human brain has ever developed. Psychologists call it the negativity bias, and although it may sound like a flaw, it was once one of humanity's greatest strengths. Imagine living tens of thousands of years ago. Your ancestors walked through forests filled with uncertainty. Every unfamiliar sound could signal danger. Every strange movement in the tall grass might be harmless, or it might be a predator waiting to attack. In such a world, which person was more likely to survive? The one who paused to admire every beautiful sunset, or the one who immediately noticed every possible threat? Nature quietly rewarded the cautious. Those who paid closer attention to danger were more likely to stay alive long enough to raise children who inherited similar tendencies. Across countless generations, the human brain became exceptionally skilled at detecting problems, remembering painful experiences, and preparing for what could go wrong. The result is the remarkable mind we carry today. It protects us constantly, but it does so by giving pain a louder voice than joy. Imagine your mind as a smoke detector inside a house. Its purpose is not to celebrate every peaceful evening or every beautiful sunrise. Its job is to notice smoke before the fire spreads. Because the consequences of missing danger are so serious, the detector is designed to react quickly, even if that means sounding an occasional false alarm. Our brains operate in much the same way. They are constantly scanning for emotional smoke. A disapproving glance, an unexpected silence, a mistake during an important presentation, a conversation that didn't go as planned. Even when no real danger exists, the mind often treats uncertainty as something that deserves immediate attention. This explains why criticism lingers so much longer than praise. Imagine receiving 10 compliments about your work and one piece of negative feedback. Logically, the positive comments should outweigh the negative one by a large margin. Yet many people find themselves thinking almost exclusively about the criticism. The mind quietly asks itself, what if they're right? What if I overlooked something? What if this becomes a bigger problem? It is trying to protect you. Unfortunately, the same system that once protected our ancestors from predators now keeps many of us awake, replaying awkward conversations from 5 years ago. Take another slow moment to think about your own experiences. Can you remember an embarrassing moment from childhood? Perhaps you answered a question incorrectly in class. Perhaps you tripped while walking across a crowded room. Perhaps you forgot someone's name or said something you immediately wished you could take back. Notice how vivid the memory still feels. Now try remembering an ordinary compliment from that same year. For many people, it is much more difficult. This isn't because life contained more pain than joy. It's because the brain stored the painful memory with greater urgency. The same pattern appears in relationships. Researchers have long observed that healthy relationships require many more positive interactions than negative ones simply to maintain balance. One harsh argument often carries far more emotional weight than several pleasant conversations. Think of trust as a beautiful sheet of glass. Building it may take months or even years. A single crack, however, appears in an instant. Although the glass can often be repaired, the mind continues remembering where the crack once existed. This is negativity bias quietly at work. It does not mean people are naturally pessimistic. It means the brain considers negative experiences especially important because they might contain lessons necessary for future survival. The same tendency explains why news headlines around the world often focus on conflict, disaster, scandal, and crisis. Imagine opening a newspaper that simply reported, "Millions of people lived peaceful lives today." It would be wonderfully reassuring. It would also attract very little attention. Our minds instinctively gravitate toward unusual threats because that is exactly what they evolved to notice. Media organizations understand this, whether consciously or not. Stories involving danger naturally capture attention more effectively than stories describing ordinary peace. As a result, many people begin believing the world is becoming steadily worse, even during periods when many measures of health, education, safety, and quality of life are improving. The brain mistakes attention for importance. Whatever occupies our thoughts begins to feel like the whole picture. Fortunately, awareness changes everything. Once you understand negativity bias, you begin noticing it gently operating beneath your daily experiences. You realize why your mind replays criticism but quickly forgets compliments. Why one unpleasant email overshadows an entire productive afternoon. Why small worries grow larger the longer they remain unexamined. Most importantly, you stop assuming that every anxious thought represents objective reality. Instead, you recognize it as one possible interpretation offered by a brain that evolved to prioritize caution. There is a profound difference between experiencing a thought and believing it. Imagine sitting beside a quiet river. Leaves drift across the surface, one after another. Some are bright green. Others are brown. Some disappear quickly, while others circle slowly before floating away. You don't need to chase every leaf. You don't need to climb into the river and argue with it. You simply watch. Thoughts can be approached in much the same way. Some carry genuine wisdom. Others are echoes of ancient survival instincts trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist. Learning to observe those thoughts without immediately accepting them is one of the most valuable forms of psychological freedom. This doesn't mean ignoring pain or pretending difficult emotions don't matter. Pain has an important purpose. It teaches. It warns. It reminds us of what needs attention. But not every uncomfortable thought deserves permanent residence in the mind. Sometimes it is simply yesterday's alarm, continuing to ring long after the fire has gone out. As this quiet truth settles in, another fascinating question begins to emerge. If so many of our fears, judgments, and emotional reactions happen automatically, before we even become aware of them, then how much of our daily life is actually directed by conscious choice? Perhaps much less than we imagine. And that mystery leads us gently into the next psychological truth, where we'll explore the hidden world of unconscious decisions and the silent processes shaping our lives long before we realize a choice has been made. 7. Most decisions happen before you realize you've made them. Imagine standing in front of two identical doors. Behind one door is a choice you will make after careful thought, weighing every possibility with complete logic. Behind the other is a choice your mind has already begun making long before you become aware of it. Instinct, memory, emotion, habit, and countless hidden calculations have quietly reached a conclusion beneath the surface of your consciousness. If someone asked you which door you walk through every day, you might confidently choose the first. After all, we like to believe we are thoughtful, deliberate, and fully aware of our decisions. But psychology offers a far more mysterious possibility. Most of the choices we make begin long before we consciously realize they have been made. Take a moment to reflect on that idea. Think about your morning routine. Did you carefully analyze which foot should touch the floor first when you got out of bed? Did you consciously calculate every movement needed to brush your teeth, pour a cup of coffee, or lock your front door? Of course not. Your mind handled thousands of tiny decisions automatically. Without these invisible processes, everyday life would become impossibly slow. Imagine having to consciously direct every blink, every breath, every step, every word in a conversation. Even preparing breakfast would require enormous mental effort. Instead, the brain quietly delegates most of these tasks to systems operating outside conscious awareness. The remarkable part is that this hidden activity extends far beyond simple habits. It also shapes many of our judgments, preferences, and important life decisions. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. Within seconds, you begin forming impressions about whether they seem trustworthy, confident, kind, or distant. You probably couldn't explain exactly how you reached those conclusions. You didn't pause to calculate the angle of their smile, the rhythm of their speech, or the subtle movements of their eyes. Yet your brain noticed all of those details. It compared them with thousands of previous experiences, searching for familiar patterns before your conscious mind had fully entered the conversation. By the time you think, "I have a good feeling about this person," much of the work has already been completed. This hidden mental activity is often described as intuition. Many people think intuition is mysterious or magical, but psychology suggests something much more grounded. Intuition is often the result of unconscious pattern recognition. Your brain absorbs enormous amounts of information throughout your life, storing experiences you no longer consciously remember. When a familiar situation appears, those memories quietly influence your feelings before you can explain why. Imagine an experienced firefighter entering a burning building. Within moments, something feels wrong. Without knowing exactly why, he orders everyone to leave immediately. Seconds later, the floor collapses. People sometimes describe stories like this as extraordinary instincts. But what likely happened was even more fascinating. Over many years, the firefighter's brain had learned to recognize tiny details, the unusual silence of the flames, the unexpected warmth beneath his feet, the smell of smoke, or subtle changes in the building's structure. His conscious mind couldn't identify every clue individually, but his unconscious mind recognized the overall pattern instantly. The feeling arrived before the explanation. This is one of the mind's quietest miracles. It constantly gathers information beyond the limits of conscious attention. Take another slow moment to consider your own experiences. Have you ever had the sense that something felt wrong before you knew why? Perhaps you entered a room and noticed an unusual atmosphere. Perhaps you hesitated before making a decision without being able to explain the reason. Later, new information appeared that suddenly made everything clear. Your unconscious mind had been quietly processing details your conscious awareness had not yet assembled into a complete picture. Of course, intuition is not always correct. Sometimes hidden fears, past disappointments, or unconscious biases influence those feelings instead. This is why intuition is valuable, but not infallible. It deserves attention, not unquestioning obedience. There is another fascinating aspect of unconscious decision-making that psychologists continue to study. In certain experiments, researchers observed subtle patterns of brain activity suggesting that the brain had begun preparing for a decision moments before participants reported consciously making it. Although scientists continue debating exactly what these findings mean, they raise an intriguing possibility. Conscious awareness may sometimes arrive later than we imagine. Rather than acting as the commander giving every order, consciousness may often resemble a narrator catching up with decisions already unfolding beneath the surface. Imagine watching a theater performance from the audience. You see the actors speaking and moving across the stage, But behind the curtain, dozens of unseen people are quietly coordinating lights, costumes, scenery, music, and timing. Without their invisible work, the performance could never happen. Conscious thought may be similar. It occupies center stage, while countless unconscious processes quietly support every scene. This perspective can feel unsettling at first. If unconscious processes shape so many of our decisions, what does that mean for free will? Are we simply following invisible programs written by biology and experience? The answer is more subtle than either extreme. Think of consciousness not as the sole decision-maker, but as a skilled editor. Your unconscious mind constantly generates ideas, emotions, impulses, and possibilities. Conscious awareness can examine them, question them, strengthen them, or choose not to act upon them. Imagine standing beside a busy road. Cars pass continuously. You did not create every car. You cannot stop traffic from existing. But you can decide which vehicle to step into. Thoughts and impulses often work the same way. Many arrive without invitation. What matters is how we respond once they appear. Understanding this changes how we think about habits. Many behaviors we call personality are actually automatic routines built through repetition. Driving to work follows familiar routes without much conscious effort. Typing on a keyboard eventually requires almost no thought. Even emotional reactions can become habits. Someone repeatedly criticized during childhood may automatically expect rejection in adulthood. Another person praised for solving problems may instinctively search for solutions whenever difficulties arise. The unconscious mind remembers patterns remarkably well. It quietly repeats what has worked before. Fortunately, this means new habits can also become automatic. Every time you practice patience instead of anger, curiosity instead of certainty, gratitude instead of complaint, you are gradually teaching your unconscious mind a different pattern. At first, the effort feels deliberate. Eventually, it becomes natural. This is how lasting change often happens, not through dramatic moments of inspiration, but through countless small repetitions that slowly reshape the hidden systems beneath conscious awareness. Take one final moment to reflect. How many parts of your day unfold almost automatically? How many choices feel like conscious decisions when they may actually be habits wearing the disguise of intention? There is no need to fear this realization. In many ways, it is deeply encouraging. The unconscious mind is not your enemy. It is an astonishing partner, tirelessly processing information, protecting you from overload, and helping you navigate an unimaginably complex world. The more gently you understand how it works, the more wisely you can work alongside it instead of against it. Yet among all the unconscious patterns quietly shaping our lives, perhaps none are more powerful than those influencing the people we feel drawn toward. Why do certain strangers feel instantly familiar? Why do some relationships seem almost inevitable, even when they eventually bring pain? The answers lie hidden in another remarkable psychological truth, one that quietly begins long before we ever fall in love. 8. We often love familiarity more than compatibility. Imagine walking into a crowded room filled with strangers. Among all the unfamiliar faces, one person catches your attention. You cannot explain exactly why. Perhaps their voice feels comforting. Perhaps their personality seems strangely recognizable. Maybe being around them feels effortless, as if you have known them for years. There is a quiet sense of familiarity. A feeling of, I know this person. But what if that feeling is not always about who they truly are? What if sometimes we are not drawn toward what is healthy, peaceful, or compatible? What if we are drawn toward what feels familiar? Take a moment to reflect on that idea. One of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology is that human beings often mistake familiarity for safety. The mind naturally prefers what it recognizes because the familiar requires less effort to understand. It feels predictable. It feels known. And because the brain evolved to seek patterns and avoid uncertainty, familiarity can create a powerful emotional pull. This explains why some people repeatedly find themselves attracted to the same types of personalities, even when those relationships lead to similar disappointments. Someone may continually choose partners who are emotionally unavailable. Someone else may feel drawn to people they have to constantly impress or rescue. Another person may repeatedly enter relationships filled with conflict and intensity. From the outside, these patterns can seem confusing. A friend might ask, "Why do you keep choosing people who hurt you?" But from the inside, the answer is often more complicated. The person may not be choosing pain. They may be choosing familiarity. To understand why, we have to look back at one of the earliest relationships humans experience, the relationship with caregivers during childhood. During our early years, we learn important lessons about connection. We learn whether people can be trusted. We learn whether our needs will be noticed. We learn whether love feels consistent, unpredictable, distant, or overwhelming. These experiences create internal expectations about relationships. Psychologists often describe these patterns through the idea of attachment. Attachment theory suggests that early interactions help shape the emotional templates we carry into adulthood. They influence how we approach closeness, vulnerability, trust, and independence. For example, someone who grew up experiencing consistent support may develop a sense that relationships are generally safe. They may find it easier to communicate openly and believe that conflict does not automatically mean abandonment. Someone who experienced inconsistent attention may become more sensitive to signs of rejection, constantly searching for reassurance. Someone who learned that emotions were ignored may become uncomfortable with vulnerability, preferring distance, even when they desire connection. These patterns are not permanent identities. They are learned responses. But because they formed early, they can feel deeply natural. Imagine a person who grew up in a house where affection was unpredictable. Some days they received warmth and attention. Other days they felt invisible. As an adult, they meet someone who is similarly inconsistent. Some moments are filled with affection. Others are distant and confusing. Logically, this relationship may feel exhausting. Emotionally, however, it may feel strangely familiar. The unpredictability creates a feeling the brain recognizes. It whispers, "This is what connection feels like." Not because it is necessarily healthy. Because it is known. Take another slow moment to consider this. Have you ever met someone and felt an immediate connection, only to later realize that the relationship repeated patterns you had experienced before? Perhaps you found yourself trying to earn someone's approval. Perhaps you felt responsible for fixing their problems. Perhaps you became anxious whenever they pulled away. These experiences can reveal something important. Sometimes we are not simply searching for love. Sometimes we are unconsciously searching for an opportunity to rewrite an old story. The mind returns to familiar situations because it hopes for a different ending. A person who felt overlooked as a child may unconsciously seek relationships where they can finally feel chosen. Someone who felt powerless may seek situations where they can finally prove their worth. Someone who experienced rejection may become deeply invested in winning the acceptance of someone difficult to reach. The heart is often trying to heal old wounds using new relationships. But there is a quiet danger in this process. A familiar pattern can feel like destiny. People sometimes say things like, "We just have incredible chemistry," when what they are experiencing may actually be emotional intensity created by uncertainty, unpredictability, or old attachment patterns. Calm relationships can sometimes feel strange to people who are used to emotional chaos. Peace may feel boring when the nervous system has learned to associate excitement with instability. A healthy connection may initially feel unfamiliar simply because it does not activate old fears. This is one reason personal growth can feel uncomfortable. Growth often requires learning a new emotional language. It means recognizing that a relationship does not have to feel like a constant test in order to be meaningful. Love does not have to be earned through suffering. Care does not have to arrive only after proving your worth. Security is not the absence of passion. Sometimes security is what allows deeper forms of connection to exist. Of course, compatibility still matters. Shared values, communication, respect, and emotional maturity all play important roles in lasting relationships. But psychology reminds us that attraction begins in a place deeper than logic. Before we ask, "Is this person good for me?" the unconscious mind often asks a different question. Does this person feel familiar? Learning to recognize the difference can change the way we approach relationships. It allows us to appreciate the comforting pull of familiarity, while still questioning whether that familiarity is leading us somewhere healthy. Because not everything that feels like home is actually where we belong. Sometimes it is simply a place we have visited before. Take one final moment to reflect. What qualities do you repeatedly find yourself drawn toward? Are they qualities that bring peace and growth? Or are they patterns that feel strangely comfortable because they are familiar? There is no need to judge the answer. Awareness is where change begins. The goal is not to eliminate familiarity from our lives. Familiarity creates warmth, trust, and connection. The goal is simply to become conscious of the invisible forces guiding our choices. Because when we understand why we are drawn to certain people, we gain the freedom to choose relationships based not only on what feels known, but also on what helps us become who we truly want to be. And yet, relationships are not the only place where our minds create hidden stories. Every person we meet is also living inside their own version of reality, carrying their own memories, fears, and explanations for the world around them. Which leads us to the next psychological truth. Everyone, without exception, is the hero of their own story. 9. Everyone is the hero of their own story. Imagine watching a movie from two different perspectives. In the first version, you follow a character who makes difficult choices, faces obstacles, and tries their best despite imperfect circumstances. You understand their fears, their motivations, and the reasons behind their actions. Even when they make mistakes, you find yourself offering them some compassion because you know the full story. Now imagine watching the same character from another person's perspective. Suddenly, the same actions look different. The choices that seemed understandable begin to appear selfish. The mistakes feel careless. The decisions that had explanations now seem like excuses. The character has not changed. Only the perspective has. Take a moment to reflect on that. One of the most powerful psychological truths about human beings is that every person experiences life from the center of their own story. We are naturally inclined to view ourselves as the main character, not necessarily because we believe we are perfect, but because we have access to our own thoughts, intentions, fears, and struggles in a way we can never fully access in others. We know the reasons behind our actions. We see the battles nobody else sees. We remember the difficult moments that influenced our decisions. But when we look at other people, we often see only the final result. This difference creates one of the most common sources of misunderstanding between human beings. Imagine someone arriving late to an important meeting. From their own perspective, perhaps they woke up early, encountered unexpected problems, helped a stranger on the way, and spent the entire morning trying to fix a situation outside their control. From another person's perspective, they simply arrived late. The first person sees the entire movie. The second person sees one scene. And yet both people feel certain they understand what happened. This psychological tendency is connected to something called the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to explain other people's behavior through their personality, while explaining our own behavior through circumstances. When someone else makes a mistake, we often think, they are careless. They are irresponsible. They do not respect other people. But when we make the same mistake, our explanation changes. I was under pressure. I had a difficult day. There were things happening that they don't understand. The fascinating part is that both explanations can feel completely reasonable from the inside. Take another slow moment to consider your own experiences. Think about a time when someone misunderstood your intentions. Perhaps you said something that came across as rude, even though you didn't mean it that way. Perhaps you forgot something important, and someone assumed you didn't care. How quickly did your mind create an explanation? You probably thought about your circumstances. You remembered your stress, your intentions, and the things that person did not know. Now imagine how often the same thing happens with everyone else. Every stranger you pass, every difficult person you encounter, every person who frustrates you is also carrying a private story filled with details you cannot see. The impatient driver may be dealing with an emergency. The quiet coworker may be struggling with something personal. The person who seems distant may have learned to protect themselves through silence. This does not mean every behavior should be excused. Understanding is not the same as approval. Boundaries still matter. Accountability still matters. But recognizing that people act from within their own stories creates a different kind of awareness. It replaces immediate judgment with curiosity. Instead of asking, what is wrong with this person? We begin asking, what experiences might have shaped this person into who they are? This simple shift can transform relationships. It can reduce unnecessary conflict. It can create space for conversations that would otherwise never happen. Because many disagreements are not actually battles between good people and bad people. They are collisions between different realities. Two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different interpretations. A parent may believe they are offering guidance. A child may experience the same behavior as control. A manager may believe they are providing motivation. An employee may experience it as pressure. A friend may think they are being honest. Another friend may experience the honesty as criticism. Everyone is interpreting the world through a personal lens, shaped by memories, values, fears, and expectations. The lens itself often remains invisible. We rarely think, I am currently viewing this situation through my unique psychological history. We simply think, this is how things are. That certainty can be dangerous, because the mind often confuses perspective with reality. Imagine wearing a pair of colored glasses without realizing they are there. Everything you see appears naturally tinted. You might assume the world itself has that color. But the color is coming from the lens. Human perception works in a similar way. Our experiences create invisible filters that influence how we interpret everything around us. This realization leads to a profound question. If everyone is the hero of their own story, does that mean everyone is right? Not necessarily. A person's perspective can be understandable while still being inaccurate. Someone can sincerely believe they are helping while causing harm. Someone can honestly believe they are protecting themselves while pushing others away. Good intentions do not automatically create good outcomes. But understanding the story behind a behavior allows us to respond more wisely. It gives us the ability to separate a person from a single action. A mistake becomes something someone did, not the complete definition of who they are. This is one of the foundations of emotional maturity. It is the ability to hold two truths at the same time. Someone can have understandable reasons for their behavior, and their behavior can still need to change. The world becomes more complex when we stop searching for simple villains and heroes. But it also becomes more human. Because beneath every argument, every conflict, and every misunderstanding are people trying to navigate life using the limited information available to them. Everyone is carrying a story. Everyone is protecting something. Everyone is trying, in their own way, to make sense of a confusing world. Take a quiet moment to reflect. Think of someone you have struggled to understand. What might their story look like from the inside? What fears, experiences, or hopes might be influencing the way they see the world? You do not need to agree with them. You do not need to forget your own perspective. But seeing beyond your own story creates something rare. It creates compassion. And compassion does not make us weaker. It simply allows us to see more of the picture. Yet even when we understand that everyone carries their own perspective, another psychological illusion remains. One that causes many people to overestimate what they know and underestimate what they still have to learn. Because sometimes the greatest obstacle to wisdom is not a lack of intelligence. It is the confidence that comes before understanding. And that leads us to the next psychological truth. 10. Confidence often looks like competence. Imagine walking into a room where two people are discussing a subject you know very little about. The first person speaks with absolute certainty. Their voice is strong. Their opinions are clear. They rarely hesitate. They seem completely convinced that they understand the topic better than anyone else. The second person speaks more carefully. They pause before answering. They mention areas where they are still learning. They admit when something is complicated or uncertain. Without knowing anything else about them, who would you trust more? Many people would naturally choose the first person. Confidence feels like knowledge. Certainty feels like expertise. But psychology reveals something much more interesting. The person who sounds the most certain is not always the person who understands the most. Sometimes the strongest confidence appears precisely where understanding is weakest. Take a moment to reflect on that. One of the most fascinating patterns in human behavior is that our confidence does not always grow at the same speed as our actual ability. In fact, when people are just beginning to learn something, they may feel surprisingly confident because they do not yet understand the complexity of the subject. As knowledge increases, confidence can sometimes decrease. Not because people become less capable, but because they become more aware of how much there is to know. This psychological phenomenon is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. It describes a situation where people with limited knowledge or experience in a particular area may overestimate their abilities, while people with greater expertise often recognize the limits of their own understanding. Imagine someone who has just learned a few basic phrases in a new language. At first, they may feel excited and confident. They know enough to order food, introduce themselves, and have simple conversations. The language seems straightforward. Then they begin studying more deeply. Suddenly, they discover complex grammar rules, cultural meanings, exceptions, and countless words they do not know. The more they learn, the larger the world of knowledge becomes. Their confidence may temporarily shrink, but their understanding has grown. This is a pattern that appears across many areas of life. Someone who watches a few videos about investing may quickly feel qualified to make major financial decisions. Someone who reads a few articles about psychology may believe they understand human behavior completely. Someone who experiences small success in a particular skill may assume they have mastered the entire field. The problem is not confidence itself. Confidence can be valuable. It helps people take action, pursue goals, and overcome fear. The problem appears when confidence grows faster than competence. Take another slow moment to consider your own experiences. Have you ever looked back at something you believed strongly years ago and wondered, how could I have been so certain? Perhaps you had an opinion about a subject you barely understood. Perhaps you judged someone without knowing the full story. Perhaps you thought you had everything figured out, only to discover later how much you had missed. This experience is not a sign of failure. In many ways, it is a sign of learning. Growth often involves realizing that the world is more complicated than we initially imagined. A beginner sees a simple picture. An expert sees thousands of hidden details. Imagine looking at a forest from a distance. From far away, it appears simple. You see trees, colors, and a general shape. But walk deeper inside. Suddenly, you notice different species of plants, changing ecosystems, hidden paths, subtle patterns, and relationships between countless living things. The forest did not become more complicated. Your awareness expanded. Expertise often works the same way. The beginner sees the surface. The expert sees the depth beneath it. This is why genuine experts often communicate with more humility than people expect. They understand uncertainty. They know exceptions exist. They recognize that every answer creates new questions. A scientist who has spent decades studying a subject may say, "We still have much to learn." A person with only a small amount of exposure may say, "It's simple, I understand everything." The difference is not intelligence alone. It is awareness of complexity. This leads to one of the quiet paradoxes of wisdom. The more you learn, the more you realize how much remains unknown. Ancient philosophers recognized this idea thousands of years ago. The beginning of wisdom is often not knowing everything. It is recognizing that you do not. Yet modern society often rewards certainty. People who speak confidently are frequently perceived as leaders. Those who express doubt may appear less capable, even when their caution reflects deeper understanding. This creates a strange imbalance. The loudest voice in the room is not always the most informed. The person making the strongest claims is not always the person who has considered the most possibilities. Sometimes the wisest person is the one quietly thinking, "Before I answer, I need to understand more." Of course, humility should not be confused with insecurity. A person can be highly skilled and still acknowledge uncertainty. True confidence does not require pretending to know everything. It comes from trusting your ability to learn, adapt, and respond when new information appears. There is a profound difference between saying, "I know everything about this," and saying, "I know enough to begin, and I am willing to keep learning." The second mindset creates growth. It allows people to improve without feeling threatened by mistakes. Because mistakes are not evidence of personal failure. They are information. They reveal where understanding can expand. Take another moment to reflect. Where in your life might you be more confident than knowledgeable? Where might you be dismissing new information because it challenges something you already believe? And perhaps an even more important question: where could you replace certainty with curiosity? The goal is not to doubt yourself constantly. That would simply create another limitation. The goal is balance. To have enough confidence to move forward and enough humility to keep learning. Because the most dangerous place to stand is not ignorance. It is the illusion that there is nothing left to discover. The mind becomes wiser when it stays open. And yet, even as we learn to recognize the limits of our knowledge, another challenge remains. Because one of the hardest things to see is not what we do not know about the world. It is what we do not know about ourselves. Our greatest blind spots are often invisible precisely because they are part of the way we see. And that brings us to the next psychological truth. 11. You can't see your biggest blind spots. Imagine trying to look directly at your own eyes without using a mirror. No matter how hard you try, it is impossible. Your eyes allow you to see almost everything around you, yet they cannot observe themselves directly. They are constantly working, constantly perceiving, but they remain hidden from their own view. In a strange way, the human mind is similar. Your brain is the tool you use to understand the world, interpret experiences, and make sense of yourself. But the very same tool that creates your perception is also limited in its ability to examine itself. Take a moment to reflect on that. One of the most humbling truths about psychology is that some of the things influencing us the most are often the things we are least able to see. These hidden influences are called blind spots. A blind spot is a part of our thinking, personality, or behavior that remains outside our awareness. It does not mean we are unaware of everything about ourselves. Most people know their strengths, weaknesses, preferences, and habits to some degree. But there are certain patterns that remain invisible because they are deeply connected to the way we experience reality itself. The challenge is that we rarely experience our own blind spots as blind spots. They simply feel like truth. Imagine a person wearing glasses with a small mark on one lens. If they have worn those glasses for years, they may eventually stop noticing the mark. The world appears normal to them. They might even assume everyone sees the same slight distortion. The mark does not disappear. They simply adapt to it. Our psychological blind spots work in much the same way. A person who tends to interrupt others may think they are simply being enthusiastic. Someone who often avoids responsibility may believe they are just being realistic. A person who constantly seeks approval may see themselves as caring and considerate without noticing how much their choices are shaped by the fear of disappointing others. From the inside, these patterns often feel reasonable. This is what makes them difficult to recognize. Take another slow moment to consider this. Have you ever noticed a behavior in someone else that they seemed completely unaware of? Perhaps a friend who always turns conversations back toward themselves. Perhaps someone who becomes defensive whenever they receive feedback. Perhaps a person who repeatedly creates the same problems but seems unable to understand why they keep happening. It is often surprisingly easy to notice patterns in other people. Yet when it comes to ourselves, the same clarity becomes much harder to access. Psychologists call this the blind spot bias, the tendency to recognize biases and limitations in others while underestimating them in ourselves. A person may understand that human beings are influenced by emotions, habits, and assumptions. They may even explain these ideas intelligently. Yet when their own emotions and assumptions appear, they often believe they are simply seeing reality clearly. This is one of the mind's most fascinating contradictions. We know humans can be biased. We simply find it difficult to believe that we are the ones currently being biased. Imagine watching a sports game. A fan watching their favorite team may see every unfair decision made by the referee. They notice missed calls, questionable choices, and mistakes from the opposing side. But when the referee makes a decision against their own team, suddenly the situation looks different. The referee is no longer imperfect. They are clearly wrong. The same psychological process appears in everyday life. When another person reacts emotionally, we may describe them as irrational. When we react emotionally, we often explain that our feelings are justified because of the circumstances. Again, this does not happen because people are dishonest. It happens because we experience our own inner world directly. We feel our intentions. We know our struggles. We understand the context behind our choices. Other people only see the surface. This difference creates a natural imbalance. Fortunately, blind spots are not permanent. They can become visible through one powerful process: self-awareness. Self-awareness does not mean constantly analyzing yourself or searching for flaws. It means becoming curious about the patterns that shape your life. It means being willing to ask uncomfortable questions. Why did I react that way? What am I assuming here? Could there be another explanation? What would someone who disagrees with me notice that I don't? These questions create space between an experience and your immediate interpretation of it. That space is where growth begins. Think of your mind as a room filled with mirrors. Most of the time, we look only at the mirror that reflects the version of ourselves we already understand. Self-awareness is the process of turning toward the mirrors we usually avoid. Sometimes the reflection may be uncomfortable. We may discover impatience we did not recognize, fear we disguised as logic, insecurity hidden beneath confidence, pride hidden beneath certainty. But seeing these things does not make us weaker. It gives us choice. A pattern that remains invisible controls us. A pattern we can see becomes something we can work with. This is why feedback from others can be so valuable. Not all criticism is accurate, and not every opinion deserves our attention, but occasionally another person can see something about us that we cannot see ourselves. A trusted friend, partner, or mentor can act like a mirror held at a different angle. They reveal parts of our reflection that were previously hidden. The challenge is that accepting feedback requires humility. Our first instinct is often to defend ourselves. That's not true. You don't understand. There's a reason I do that. Sometimes those responses are correct, but sometimes they are simply the mind protecting an image of itself. Take another quiet moment to reflect. Think about the last time someone gave you feedback that was difficult to hear. What was your immediate reaction? Did you become curious? Or did you immediately search for reasons why they were wrong? That moment can reveal a great deal about how we relate to our own blind spots. The goal is not to believe every criticism. That would create another problem. The goal is to remain open enough to examine the possibility. Because wisdom does not come from believing we know ourselves completely. It comes from accepting that we are always discovering new parts of ourselves. A person can spend an entire lifetime learning about the world and still remain a mystery to themselves. The mind is incredibly complex. It contains memories, emotions, instincts, fears, dreams, and patterns formed across decades of experience. Expecting complete self-understanding may be impossible, but moving toward greater awareness is always possible. And perhaps that is what makes the journey meaningful. We are not finished puzzles waiting to be solved. We are living systems, constantly changing, learning, and revealing new layers. So before moving forward, consider one final question. What might you discover about yourself if you stopped trying to prove who you are and simply became curious about who you are becoming? Because understanding the mind is not only about looking backward at where our patterns came from. It is also about understanding how we experience the one thing we can never escape: time itself. And that leads us to the next psychological truth: why the years of our lives can feel as though they move faster the older we become. 12. Time speeds up because the brain stops paying attention. Imagine being a child sitting in the back seat of a car during a long family journey. The destination feels impossibly far away. You ask, are we there yet? After what feels like an entire day, even though only 30 minutes have passed. Every mile seems significant. Every passing tree, every new building, every unfamiliar road becomes part of the adventure. Now imagine experiencing the same journey as an adult. The same distance, the same road, the same number of hours. Yet somehow the trip feels much shorter. The years seem to pass more quickly. Months disappear almost unnoticed. Birthdays arrive sooner than expected. One moment you are beginning a new chapter of life, and the next you find yourself wondering where all the time went. Take a moment to reflect on that feeling. Why does time appear to move faster as we grow older? The clock has not changed. A minute is still a minute. An hour is still an hour. Yet our experience of time is deeply connected to the way our minds process information. Time is not simply something we measure, it is something we perceive. And perception can change. One of the most fascinating explanations for this phenomenon is that the brain experiences time differently depending on how much attention and novelty we give to our surroundings. When we are young, almost everything is new. A child experiences the world as an endless collection of discoveries. The first day of school, the first friendship, the first time seeing snow, the first time traveling somewhere unfamiliar. Even ordinary experiences contain layers of curiosity because the brain is constantly recording new information. New experiences create rich memories. The mind pays close attention because it has no previous reference point. But as we grow older, more of life becomes familiar. The same routes, the same routines, the same conversations, the same environments. The brain becomes more efficient. And while efficiency is useful, it can also make time feel compressed. Imagine walking through a forest for the first time. You notice everything: the unusual shapes of trees, the sounds of unfamiliar birds, the texture of the ground beneath your feet, the changing colors of leaves. Your mind records countless details because everything feels important. Now imagine walking through the same forest every day for years. Eventually, you may barely notice the journey. You still walk the same path. You still pass the same trees. But your attention is elsewhere. The forest has not become less beautiful. Your brain has simply stopped recording every detail. This is one reason routine can make years feel like they disappear. When days become repetitive, fewer moments stand out in memory. The brain stores fewer distinct markers, and when we look back, the period feels shorter because there are fewer unique experiences separating one moment from another. Think about a typical week. A Monday morning commute. The usual work or responsibilities. The same meals. The same evening routine. When Friday arrives, it can feel as though the week vanished. Now compare that with a vacation where every day involves something new. New places, new foods, new conversations, new experiences. A week away can feel surprisingly long when remembered afterward. The difference is not the amount of time. It is the amount of attention. Take another slow moment to consider your own life. Think about a year that felt incredibly long. Perhaps it was a year filled with major changes, challenges, learning, or new experiences. Now think about a year that disappeared quickly. Was it more predictable? More repetitive? Did fewer moments stand out? For many people, the answer is yes. The brain measures time partly through memory. The more meaningful moments we create, the more detailed our internal timeline becomes. This does not mean every day needs to be filled with dramatic adventures. A common misunderstanding is that slowing down time requires constantly seeking excitement. It does not. Often, it simply requires paying closer attention. A quiet conversation can become memorable when we are fully present. A familiar walk can feel different when we notice the changing seasons. A simple meal can become meaningful when we appreciate the people sharing it. Attention transforms ordinary moments into experiences. This idea connects deeply with mindfulness, the practice of intentionally noticing the present moment without immediately rushing toward the next thing. Many people spend much of their lives mentally somewhere else. While eating breakfast, they think about work. While working, they think about the weekend. While spending time with loved ones, they worry about future responsibilities. The body is present. The mind is elsewhere. And because the brain records fewer details from moments we barely experience, life can feel as though it moves faster. The present moment is constantly disappearing. The only way to truly experience it is to notice it while it is here. There is also another fascinating aspect of time perception. When we are experiencing something unpleasant, time often seems slower. A difficult conversation can feel endless. A painful wait can feel much longer than the actual minutes passing. This happens because the brain pays intense attention to the experience. Every second receives focus. Every detail becomes noticeable. Ironically, when we are fully engaged with something, whether pleasant or unpleasant, we often experience time differently. The mind stretches moments that contain information. It compresses moments that contain little new information. This reveals a quiet truth about life. Perhaps time does not simply pass. Perhaps we pass through time at different speeds, depending on how awake we are. The years that feel longest are often the years in which we are truly present. The conversations we remember. The places that changed us. The moments when we stopped rushing and actually noticed where we were. As people grow older, they often say, life goes by so quickly. But perhaps what they are really saying is something deeper. Life becomes familiar. The challenge is not stopping time. That is impossible. The challenge is staying connected to it. Creating moments that deserve attention. Remaining curious. Allowing yourself to experience the world with fresh eyes, even when the world itself feels familiar. Take one final moment to reflect. What is something in your life that you have stopped noticing? A person, a place, a daily ritual, a simple privilege that has quietly become invisible because it has always been there. What would happen if you looked at it again as though it were new? Perhaps the secret to experiencing a fuller life is not adding more years. It is adding more awareness to the years already passing. Because time is not only measured by the number of moments we live. It is also measured by the moments we truly experience. And when people finally understand this, they often discover another truth waiting beneath the surface. The things we regret most are rarely the moments we tried and failed. More often, They are the moments we never allowed ourselves to experience at all. And that brings us to the next psychological truth, the quiet weight of the chances we never took. 13. Regret is usually about the chances you never took. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet room many years from now. The world outside has changed. The people around you have changed. You have lived through countless experiences, collected memories, faced challenges, and learned lessons that only time can teach. Now imagine meeting a version of yourself from the past. The younger you asks a simple question. Is there anything you wish you had done differently? What comes to mind? Perhaps a decision you made. Perhaps a mistake you still remember. But for many people, the deepest answers are not about what they did. They are about what they never did. The conversations they never started. The opportunities they never pursued. The dreams they kept postponing. The risks they avoided. Take a moment to reflect on that. One of the most fascinating truths about human psychology is that regret often comes less from failure and more from inaction. The pain of trying and not succeeding can eventually fade because the experience becomes part of our story. We learn from it, we adapt, we move forward. But the possibilities we never explore can remain strangely powerful because they exist forever in the imagination. They become unanswered questions. What if I had tried? What if I had spoken up? What if I had taken that chance? The mind has a unique relationship with possibilities. A failed attempt creates a conclusion. A missed opportunity creates an endless collection of possibilities. Imagine two people who both dream of becoming writers. The first person writes a book, shares it with others, and receives rejection after rejection. Eventually, they decide writing will remain a personal passion rather than a career. The second person never writes the book at all. Years later, the first person may remember the disappointment, but they also remember the courage of trying. They know what happened. The second person is left with uncertainty. Perhaps the book would have failed. Perhaps it would have succeeded. Perhaps it would have changed their life. The unknown can be heavier than the known, because the mind continues creating alternate versions of reality. Psychologists often describe this through the idea of counterfactual thinking, the human tendency to imagine different outcomes from the ones that actually occurred. We naturally create mental simulations of alternate paths. The road not taken. The conversation that never happened. The choice we almost made. This ability can be useful. It helps us learn from mistakes and make better decisions in the future. But when focused too heavily on the past, it can become a source of suffering. The mind begins living in a world that does not exist. Take another slow moment to consider your own life. Is there something you once wanted to do but never attempted? A skill you wanted to learn? A place you wanted to visit? A relationship you wanted to repair? A dream you quietly abandoned because the timing never felt perfect? The interesting thing about many regrets is that they are rarely about the outcome. They are about the possibility. People often imagine that they are afraid of failure. But sometimes what they truly fear is uncertainty. Failure provides an answer. Trying and discovering that something was not right can bring peace. But avoiding the attempt leaves the question open. The mind keeps returning to the unfinished chapter. This is why people sometimes experience a strange sadness when looking back on their lives. It is not always because they made terrible choices. Often it is because they wonder what other versions of themselves might have existed. The person they could have become. The experiences they could have had. The paths that remained unexplored. Of course, this does not mean every desire should be followed, or every opportunity should be accepted. Life requires choices. Choosing one path automatically means leaving others behind. No person can experience every possibility. The goal is not to eliminate regret completely. That would be impossible. The goal is to understand which regrets come from thoughtful decisions and which come from fear quietly making decisions on our behalf. Fear has an interesting way of presenting itself as logic. It says, maybe later. The timing isn't right. What will people think? What if it doesn't work? Sometimes these concerns are wise. Sometimes they are simply protection mechanisms trying to keep us inside familiar territory. The human brain naturally prefers safety. The unknown requires energy. It creates uncertainty. It demands courage. But growth almost always exists beyond what is comfortable. Think about learning anything new. The first conversation in a new language feels uncomfortable. The first attempt at a skill feels awkward. The first step toward a dream feels uncertain. Every meaningful beginning contains a moment where we do not yet know the outcome. This is the nature of being human. We must act without complete information. We must move forward while carrying uncertainty. Take another quiet moment to reflect. Imagine your future self looking back at your current life. What would they thank you for? What would they wish you had been brave enough to begin? This question is powerful because it shifts our perspective. Instead of only thinking about avoiding future pain, we begin thinking about creating future meaning. The goal is not to live without fear. Fear will always exist. The goal is to stop allowing fear to make every important decision. Many people wait for confidence before they act. But often, confidence comes after action. The person who takes the first step becomes the person who discovers they were capable of taking the second. Courage is rarely the absence of uncertainty. It is moving forward while uncertainty is still present. There is another important lesson hidden in regret. Many people believe they need more time before pursuing what matters. They assume there will always be another opportunity, another year, another moment. But time has a quiet habit of moving forward regardless of whether we are ready. The dream postponed today can become the regret remembered tomorrow. This is why small actions matter. A single conversation, a single attempt, a single step towards something meaningful. The future is not built through dramatic moments alone. It is shaped by the small choices we repeatedly make. Take one final moment to reflect. What is one thing you have been waiting for the perfect moment to begin? Perhaps the perfect moment does not arrive first. Perhaps beginning creates the moment. Because when people look back on their lives, they rarely wish they had avoided every mistake. Mistakes become stories. Failures become lessons. Difficult experiences become evidence of having lived. But the opportunities we never allowed ourselves to experience often remain as silent questions. And maybe the greatest freedom comes from understanding this. You cannot change every part of your past, but you can still influence the story your future self will one day remember. And that brings us to the final psychological truth. The purpose of understanding the mind is not to rewrite yesterday. It is to become more aware of the person living today. 14. Awareness doesn't change the past, only the person living the present. Imagine standing at the edge of a quiet lake just before sunrise. The water is completely still, the surface reflects the sky above, but every so often a small ripple appears, a leaf falls, a gentle breeze passes, a single drop of rain touches the surface. The reflection changes. But the lake does not fight the ripple. It does not try to force the water back into the exact shape it had moments before. It simply allows the movement to happen. The human mind is much the same. Throughout this journey, we have explored the hidden patterns that shape our thoughts, emotions, relationships, choices, and perception of life. We have discovered that the mind creates stories, protects beliefs, searches for belonging, adapts to happiness, remembers pain, makes unconscious decisions, seeks familiarity, creates personal realities, overestimates certainty, hides blind spots, reshapes our experience of time, and carries the weight of possibilities left unexplored. Each of these truths reveals something important. The mind is not a simple machine that can be perfectly controlled. It is a living, changing process. Take a moment to reflect on that. Many people spend years trying to understand themselves by asking one question: why am I this way? They search through their past, their mistakes, their relationships, and their memories looking for a single explanation that will finally make everything clear. But perhaps a better question is, what patterns am I noticing now? Because awareness is not about discovering one final answer about who you are. It is about becoming more conscious of the patterns that influence who you are becoming. The past shapes us, but it does not completely define us. A person who understands their mind gains something incredibly valuable: the ability to create a small space between what happens and how they respond. Within that space exists choice. Imagine someone says something hurtful. The immediate reaction might be anger. The mind quickly creates a story. They don't respect me. They are trying to attack me. I need to defend myself. These thoughts may appear automatically, but awareness allows a pause, a moment to observe. Why did this affect me so strongly? What feeling is underneath this reaction? Is there another way to understand this situation? That small moment may seem insignificant, but it represents one of the greatest abilities humans possess: the ability to observe our own minds. Take another quiet moment to consider this. Your thoughts are constantly changing. Your emotions rise and fall. Your beliefs evolve. Your identity continues developing. Yet somewhere within all of this movement is the awareness that notices the change. The part of you that can observe thoughts without immediately becoming controlled by them. This is why psychological growth is not about eliminating negative thoughts or difficult emotions. That would be impossible. A healthy mind is not a mind that never experiences fear, sadness, anger, or uncertainty. It is a mind that understands these experiences without allowing them to completely define reality. Think of clouds moving across the sky. Some are dark and heavy. Others are light and almost invisible. But the sky itself remains. Thoughts and emotions are similar. They appear. They change. They disappear. The mistake many people make is believing that every thought requires action. Every fear requires avoidance. Every emotion requires a reaction. But awareness creates distance. It allows us to say, I am experiencing anxiety, instead of, I am an anxious person. I am having a painful thought, instead of, this thought must be true. That difference may appear small, but psychologically it is enormous. It transforms our relationship with ourselves. Throughout this journey, we have repeatedly encountered one central idea. The mind is trying to help us. Even our difficult patterns usually began as attempts to protect us. Fear developed to keep us safe. Memory developed to help us learn. Habits developed to help us function efficiently. The desire for acceptance developed because connection was essential for survival. These systems are not enemies. They are ancient tools. The challenge is learning when those tools are still useful and when they are limiting us. A compass can guide a traveler. But if the compass is damaged, following it blindly may lead the traveler away from the destination. Awareness allows us to check the compass, to ask whether the direction we are following still matches where we want to go. This is the quiet power of self-understanding. It does not erase the mistakes of yesterday. It does not change the conversations we wish we had. It does not return missed opportunities or rewrite painful memories. The past remains the past, but awareness changes the person who carries that past. A person who understands their patterns can respond differently tomorrow. They can apologize sooner. They can choose differently. They can approach relationships with greater understanding. They can recognize fear without automatically obeying it. They can appreciate life before it passes unnoticed. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of psychology. Transformation rarely begins with a dramatic moment. More often, it begins with a quiet realization. A person notices something about themselves and thinks, "I have done this before. I have believed this before. I have reacted this way before." And then, for the first time, they have the opportunity to choose something new. Take one final moment to reflect on everything we have explored. Which psychological truth stayed with you the most? Was it the idea that your identity is a story constantly being rewritten? That your beliefs may sometimes protect comfort over truth? That everyone around you is living inside their own personal narrative? That time feels faster when we stop paying attention? That regret often comes from the chances we never allowed ourselves to take? Whatever idea resonated most deeply, perhaps it revealed something important about the place you are currently standing in life. The mind is a mystery that we spend a lifetime exploring. We are both the observer and the subject, the person asking the questions and the person being understood. And maybe that is what makes being human so fascinating. We are never completely finished. We are always changing, always learning, always becoming. So as you continue beyond this moment, remember that awareness is not about becoming a different person. It is about seeing yourself more clearly. The past has already written its chapters. Some are beautiful, some are painful, some are unfinished. But the next page remains open. And every moment of awareness is an opportunity to write it with greater intention. The mind is not a problem to solve. It is a world to explore. And sometimes, the greatest discoveries are not found by searching somewhere far away. They are found by becoming still enough to notice what has been within us all along.